Smegheads? Well, with the bleakest month of the year once again in full swing, it's time to liven things up a little bit, and what better way to do that than with a look at one of my favourite TV series, Red Dwarf. Red Dwarf is a British sci-fi sitcom show written and created originally by Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, who at the time were best known for being the writers of the ITV satire show Spitting Image. Eventually they moved over to the BBC, bringing one of the cast of Spitting Image with them, to pitch the idea of a show about a slob becoming the last human being in existence, marooned out in deep space with nothing but himself and a few other misfits for company. While it took them a while to get it greenlit, after a series of convenient mishaps at the BBC comedy department opened up a gap in the door for them, they slammed their feet into that gap and stormed into the public eye, managing to make the first 2 series starring the Duke of Destruction and, one point the voice of Asterix de Gaulle, Craig Charles, as the main character Dave Lister, Chris Barry, Doug and Rob's former partner in crime on Spitting Image as Dave's bunkmate and continual annoyance target, Arnold Judas Rimmer, then unknown dancer who showed up late for his audition, Danny John-Jules as a lifeform that evolved from Lister's pet cat, and comedian Norman Lovett as the ship's senile computer Holly. The show, while not the biggest success to start with, did get decent views, which convinced the BBC to renew it for a 3rd series, which was something unheard of at the time for BBC comedies, and from there it became a cultural phenomenon. The basic premise of the series is that the 2 lowest ranking members of a mining ship known as the Red Dwarf in the near future, Lister and Rimmer, are 2 polar opposites who, despite being forced together by destiny, absolutely hate each other. But Lister gets himself into trouble when his secret pet cat, who is also pregnant, is discovered and he gets put into stasis for 6 months as punishment. But during his stay on ice, a radiation leak kills the entire crew of the ship. After Holly, the ship's computer, manages to clear away the radiation, he revives Lister 3 million years later.
Are you trying to tell me everybody's dead? Should have never let him out in the first place.
And finds that his only companions are Rimmer, who is resurrected as a hologram to keep Lister sane while alone on the ship, a life form that evolved from his pregnant cat and her kin, who was sealed away in the hold during the radiation leak, and later a salvaged service droid from a crashed ship, named Crichton, originally played by Dave Ross, but was eventually portrayed by actor and future Scrap Heap Challenge host Robert Llewellyn. After that's established, the series goes all over the place with its stories, battling genetically engineered life forms, visiting new planets, travelling through time, or just dealing with their own problems, all from a sarcastic and sardonic point of view that, while common for British sitcoms at the time, had never really been tried in a sci-fi setting before. The closest TV show like this beforehand was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which Red Dwarf definitely shares similarities with, but unlike Hitchhikers, became a groundbreaker in television, opening the gates for all sorts of sci-fi themed comedies, and all from this simple, cheap, but brilliantly made show about a slob, a git, a preener, a senile computer, and a guy with a head shaped like a novelty condom. Whew, managed to get all that out in less than 1,000 words. But with all that said, let's take a look at the best the series has to offer, so sit tight, Smegheads. This is the top 10 Red Dwarf episodes. Number 10. The End. Seems only fitting to start off with the first episode, which is actually called The End, yet it's really the beginning, though it's got nothing to do with the episode The Beginning, which is not the end, and neither one of the middle, which is an episode that hasn't been made yet. This is the episode that started it all, and established the 4 original actors of the series in their respective roles, some bonding with them instantly, others needing some time to grow into them. But either way, those who are more familiar with the show's later series might be surprised to see how much more cheap and laid back it is compared to the later series. And to be fair, starting off here can turn some people off, as it did me the first time, but the first episode manages to still establish the brand of humour and wit that would define the series for the rest of its run.
Oh, Rimmer! You are a Smeghead.
Even if the show wasn't at its highest quality yet, but it managed to get its base elements in. Rimmer's snidey and prudish nature whilst being an all-around loser, Lister's simple-minded charm and optimism.
This is not cheating! It's merely an aid to memory, helps me marshal the facts already in my command.
Does copying the entire textbooks onto your body? Why don't you hand your body in and let them mark that?
Holly's senile and almost childlike innocence.
Well, she won't be much use to you on Fiji now. Not unless it snows and he needs something to grip the path with.
And the cat's ego and energy.
Ow! dangerous.
This also established a few characters who would later become regulars in future series, such as Captain Hollister, Christine Kachansky, and all through it we still get those great Grant Naylor-style jokes about society, pop culture, religion, politics, and establishing what kind of future this world is set in. This is also one of the most quotable episodes in the early series as well.
On Fiji.
Yeah, the prices there are unbelievable.
Yes, because they had a volcanic eruption and now most of Fiji's 3 feet below sea level. What about the sheep? What are you going to do, buy them water wings? Fit them with stilts? Better still, you could crossbreed them with dolphins and have leaping mutton.
A simple but classic episode that has a charm that could only be captured once, no matter how many times the USA tried to recapture it. Number 9. Fathers and Sons. A lot of fans of Red Dwarf haven't been sticking around for the more recent series that have been produced by the TV channel Dave, and while I admit it's certainly not the best run of the series compared to the one between series 3 and 6, I'd also argue it's not the worst that Red Dwarf has to offer. I'll get to that soon, trust me, and there are still some good episodes in this run. Lister's never really known where he came from or who his real father is, having established in series 3 that he was found under a pool table as a baby in Liverpool. Well, in the episode Ouroboros from series 7, it's revealed that through some kind of paradox, he is his own father, and he was put on Earth in the 23rd century to create a never-ending cycle. Much like when you eat Pringles and you have to walk by the cupboard that you keep them in to throw the empty cans away. In the episode Father and Sons, Lister is feeling down about how he's not been able to be raised by his father, who is himself, so he decides to get blind stinking drunk and record a message to himself to watch the following day, which he doesn't remember making due to getting drunk, and starts acting like a real father to himself.
Who are you to tell me what to do? What have you ever done with your life?
While I'm not the biggest fan of the idea of Lister being his own dad, especially since they don't really explain how that works very well, although that's par for the course with Series 7, this episode takes that concept and has fun with it in a way that hasn't really been done in sci-fi shows and movies that had this concept before. Hell, even Futurama didn't do this idea with Fry being his own grandfather, which genuinely surprises me. It's a brilliant idea of the concept of yourself being your own parent, which I think only Red Dwarf could do.
See that tiny speck? Half a light year away. That's your Gibson Les Paul, that is. No! Tough love. Do you want some more? Now enroll in the mech engineering programme and get the filling done now!
This series also gave us a great commentary on religion and the reveal of why Rimmer's last name is Judas in the episode Lemons, but I personally think that this episode is the best one of the Dave runs so far. There's a lot of extra stuff going on as well, like a lot of the Dave-held Red Dwarf episodes, involving a future-predicting AI with cheekbones that could cut through concrete. Seriously, she could get into a sword fight with Angelina Jolie with those things. The bits revolving around Lister are the parts that I love in this episode, and proof that a channel named after him can still handle the show, even if it mostly just shows reruns of old panel shows and Robot Wars. All it needs is reruns of Coronation Street and Craig Charles will be on this channel 24/7. Number 8. Better Than Life. The first two series have their moments, but most fans would agree that they hadn't quite found their feet yet as a show. But there are still a lot of great moments, and it's a brilliant throwback to classic 80s BBC sci-fi, which I'm a huge fan of, and there are some great early episodes such as Queeg, Future Echoes, and my personal favourite, Better Than Life. I did have to debate with myself whether or not to put Crichton on this list, since it's significant in being Crichton's first appearance in the series, plus the great performance by his actor Dave Ross is also worth mentioning, who would go on to play Talkie Toaster.
Howdy doodly do. How's it going? I'm Talkie. Talkie's the name, toasting's the game. Anyone like any toast?
No toast!
But I feel Better Than Life is, well, better, to be honest. Rimmer gets a belated letter informing him of his father's death. While everyone the boys knew died long ago, this letter really makes it sink in for Rimmer, who becomes depressed about the fact that his father never said that he was proud of him.
I always wanted just once, for him to say to me, well done.
In the throes of his depression, he and the rest of the crew decide to play the VR game Better Than Life to experience the joys that he never had before he died. Why didn't they make that game for PlayStation VR? It probably wouldn't have bombed if they did that. VR games became a staple of Red Dwarf, with the interface changing each time they appeared, and this was the one to start it off. While the episode itself is mostly just a bunch of gags about the gang enjoying the high life, it's one of the first major bits of character development for Rimmer, and brings the relationship between him and Lister further along, which in Series 7 would eventually result in this.
Rimsey?
And a million fanfictions were made a reality on that day. This is one of the many episodes that shows off Chris Barry's amazing acting ability at its best, and shows that despite how much of a tosspot Rimmer is, he's really quite sympathetic and lovable in a strange way. Chris Barry's skill was shown off in Spitting Image with his great portrayals of people like Neil Kinnock, Ronald Reagan, Kenneth Williams, and Prince Charles.
Listen, Dan, you were right to compare yourself to Jack Kennedy, and that's how we're gonna present you.
You mean you're going to groom me for the White House?
No, we're gonna have you assassinated.
But he never got a chance to show off his real full range of acting ability hidden behind a microphone or pounds of latex. So I'm glad that they gave him that chance in Red Dwarf. Plus it's always good to get a few jokes about golfing whenever you can.
How's about a little bit of ooby-dooby-doo?
How's about a little bit of ooby-dooby-don't? What a pest.
That scene would have gone very differently if it was Tiger Woods playing. Number 7. Backwards. The first episode of Series 3, the series where Red Dwarf became Red Dwarf. The change between Series 2 and 3 was a very drastic change in its style, set and prop design, casting changes and even more exciting stories, and the deliberate lack of an explanation doesn't exactly help that transition. Hell, even if you slow down that Star Wars text crawl at the beginning and read it, it still doesn't explain everything. These changes were all made to make Red Dwarf more of what Grant and Naylor intended it to be from the beginning, and really brought the series into its golden age with Series 3, 4, 5 and 6, and this is the episode that started off that peak period. And what an episode it is. Rimmer, Crichton and Holly accidentally go through a time hole and are transported billions of years into the future where the big crunch has begun and all of time is going backwards, and they've landed in what's supposed to be the backwards version of London in 1993, though a version of London in the early 90s where people are still wearing leather jackets and hoop earrings is already a bizarre one. Lister and the cat eventually do catch back up, and then from there it's basically just a bunch of gags about how a world that goes backwards is weird but bizarrely makes more sense than when you go the other way.
Masked man with a sawn-off shotgun sucked bullets out of 2 cashiers and a security guard in a South London bank tomorrow.
And also a few ways in which it doesn't.
Get this thing in forward gear!
It is in forward gear!
Though then again, perhaps in that world I'll have the hair from the top of my head back. While the way that the backwards world works is a bit inconsistent, sometimes the time is just reversed, in some cases the attitudes of the worlds are backwards too, and in some cases it's not. The reason why I love this episode is because how much more ambitious and impressive the episode is compared to the previous 2 series. The genius of how they just played the footage backwards to make the episode feel like it's a different world, and the breakthrough it made for the series as a whole is really significant. Plus Robert Llewellyn's debut as Crichton is a treat to watch as well.
Name?
I'll just put Crichton.
Plus the barroom brawl scene is all the more impressive when you realise that Craig Charles did all of his own stunts in the early series. And then there's this glorious bit of hidden audience sniping.
You are a stupid, square-headed, bald git, aren't you? I ain't pointing at you, I'm pointing at you. But I'm not actually addressing you. I'm addressing the one prat in the country who's bothered to get hold of this recording, turn it round and actually work out the rubbish that I'm saying. What a poor, sad life he's got!
I guess that means me then. Not that I needed any reaffirming of that fact.
Frankly, your act's crap. Anyway, anybody could have done it. I hate a lot of you. Bollocks to you!
But as the inhabitants of this world would say, sick me up with them, what extent? Number 6. Pete. Compared to the series that came before it, Series 8 was definitely an improvement, much like the Mega Man X series, but still it wasn't quite as great as the show when it was at its peak, but at least they took advantage with having the series use more opportunities than before, and one of the best examples of that was the 2-part episode, Pete. After some of the gang returns from another Canary suicide mission, long story and one that I'm not drunk enough to explain right now, Crichton, Kochanski and the cat find a time wand, a device that can freeze, reverse, fast forward and even store pockets of time. Meanwhile, Lister and Rimmer are getting into a series of Hogan's Hero-style antics with Captain Hollister, none of which particularly go well, which ends with them winding up in the hole for several months with this guy.
They call me Birdman.
Oh, aye? Why is that?
Because he really likes instant custard. Why do you think? This is Pete. He's 9 years old, which in sparrow years is 9 years old.
I think we've just found out what's going to happen to Bill Oddie when he retires. The two parties then meet back up, and after a botched attempt to revive Pete, it then becomes an ongoing series of attempts to subdue a T-Rex and turn it back into a sparrow.
Where the hell did Barney's ugly brother come from? From Pete, sir. Birds are descended from dinosaurs, or from the theropod family. I inadvertently reversed evolution several million years.
Series 8 was an attempt to return back to the sitcom format the show had before Series 7 made it more of a comedy drama, but with a new setup of Lister and Rimmer continually butting heads with the captain, and while it doesn't always work, there were some great gags that came from it, and this episode had some of the best. Some of the highlights include the captain's description of the dinosaur's attempt to cool his mouth off after Lister makes it a giant curry.
Do you know what happens when a dinosaur eats cow vindaloo, 2.5 tons of mint chalk ice cream, followed by 400 crates of orange ice pops, and swills it all down with 2,000 gallons of a popular fizzy drink after its burp?
It didn't get a diarrhea attack, did it?
100% correct.
And the beloved Scutters going all Steve McQueen to help out Lister and Rimmer. Though I think the next time I saw dinosaurs in a spaceship in Doctor Who was much more entertaining, if only because it had Mr. Filch and Arthur Weasley in it. Though ironically, he was also in Red Dwarf. Number 5. Gunman of the Apocalypse. Episodes where the boys from the Dwarf play alternate versions of themselves are always some of the best, such as Back to Reality, Demons and Angels, and my favourite of that category, Gunman of the Apocalypse. The boys come across a ship full of rogue simulants who want to destroy all humans, which isn't good news for the Starbuggers, as they were known between Series 6 and 7. They manage to fight them off, but not before they transmit a virus into their navigation system to make them crash into a volcanic moon. The boys then tackle the virus in their VR game console in the form of a western, with Crichton taking on the role as the sheriff, Dave as Brent Riverbolt, Rimmer as Dangerous Dan McGrew, and the cat as the Riviera Kid. While this episode doesn't let the actors explore the different personalities of these alternate characters as much as in other episodes where they do similar concepts, this episode is great for a very novel idea of putting these sci-fi characters into a Wild West environment, which, while a little cliche, is a treat to watch, especially since they found a really nice set to film in. So nice, in fact, that the Chuckle Brothers would film in that exact same set a few years later.
Crikey.
This episode also introduced another fan favourite moment, the Vindaloovians.
I am Tarka Doll, an ambassador of the great Vindaloovian Empire. The Vindaloovian people despise all humans. They are the vermin of the universe. Is that not right, Bindi Badgie?
The funny thing is that since I don't eat curry, it took me years to find out that those names are actually different types of curry.
The Vindaloovian Empire has pledged to exterminate them all.
But it's a shame we never got to see them do this.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. Baby, don't hurt me.
Number 4. Stoke Mir Clipper. Many fans are in agreement that Series 7 is the worst run of Red Dwarf, and I'm inclined to agree. Rob Grant and Doug Naylor were in disagreement for years about what direction they wanted to take the series, but after Rob left, Doug was free to make all the changes he wanted, but not all of them were good. With the lack of the studio audience, ignoring Lister and Crichton's character development since Series 3 and having them be more immature and irritating, especially Crichton. Though you could argue that they at least gave a reason for Crichton's character change, but that still doesn't make it good. Introducing Christine Kochanski into the main cast, which is not a bad idea in concept, but it certainly didn't pan out very well with the first series they attempted it.
Do you think I like flying around space in this big skip with thrusters? Do you think I even enjoy breathing in on this ship? And to cap it all, I am faced with some neurotic droid who's completely obsessed with my pants drawer.
And having more of a lean towards the humour of the first 3 series, but having more of a grand scope and style compared to those series, it all just resulted in a bit of a mess. And sadly it proved to be too much for Chris Barry, who decided to leave and be in something even worse than Series 7. The British Empire. No wonder he came back for the following series, being in that would crush anyone's morale. However, I'd argue that there were some highlights of Series 7, and while I considered the episode Tika to Ride for its great twist of JFK being the man behind the grassy knoll, the last appearance of the great Ace Rimmer is what I feel is really the best of the worst. Ace Rimmer is an alternate universe version of Rimmer, who is a high-flying pilot in the Space Corps and an all-around badass. He comes on board to reveal that he's actually not the original Ace from the episode Dimension Jump, and that said version has now started a tradition where he passes on the mantle of Ace Rimmer to ensure that there will always be a Rimmer to protect the universe, and now it's Bonehead's turn. This is an episode that really exemplifies the best elements of both these characters and Chris Barry's talent as well, showing that underneath his mild, deep layers of pomposity, smarm, smugness, arrogance and bitterness, he's just a guy who got dealt a bad hand in life, and that every other player decided to work against him. It's a tale of life that's very close to home for a lot of people, myself included, and it shows that even the most worthless person in the world can be made to be something brilliant if they put their mind to it. This episode is also great for how it could have been potentially the last time we saw Chris Barry in Red Dwarf, and as a swan song episode, it's a really good one, though of course he did end up coming back, but that doesn't negate the honour and power of this episode and what it does for Rimmer's character, though sadly this particular Rimmer was never actually seen again in the series, and the one we got after this one was a nanite reconstructed version of Rimmer from before the series even started. Red Dwarf is a confusing show, which is ironic when a sci-fi spoof is more confusing than Star Trek, Doctor Who and Lost put together.
There'll be time for explanations later, and hopefully some sex.
Number 3. Polymorph. Arguably one of the most iconic episodes of the series, Polymorph is one of the most ambitious episodes in Red Dwarf history. And how well did it turn out? A genetically engineered life form, or Gelth as the series sometimes likes to call them, has escaped from its deep space prison and broken into Red Dwarf, and its major power is that it seems to feed off of negative emotions and can disguise itself as anything. It then skulks around the ship and picks off the crew members one by one, taking one of their personality qualities and turning them into emotional wrecks. Well, even more so than usual anyway. This is technically the first time where the dwarf has played alternate versions of themselves. There were some previous episodes that touched on this concept like Confidence and Paranoia, Me Too and Parallel Universe, but this is the first episode where the gang don completely different personas while still in their own skin, and it really shows off their acting skill, especially Barry's, in a hilarious, though in reflection slightly awkward role.
My own personal preference, which is the Committee for the Liberation and Integration of Terrifying Organisms and their Rehabilitation into Society. One drawback with that, the abbreviation is clitoris.
Making fun of Rolf Harris before it was cool. And slightly tasteless. To be fair to them, they didn't know at the time. It's the same as when they spoofed Jimmy Savile on Spitting Image, who Barry also played, ironically.
Oh, goodness gracious, it's my old friends, Doctor, and Nurse. Now, when I got your letter asking Uncle Jimmy here to come to our special hospital, I jogged all the way here via Pakistan.
This guy had no luck when it came to portraying 80s pop culture icons. What next? Did he also play Bill Cosby? They also did succeed in creating a genuine sense of dread and suspense in this episode, which is quite impressive for a comedy and has some of the best effects in the whole series run. The sequel episode to Polymorph is okay too, though it was hard for me to get into on first viewing with the lack of horror from the first episode and worse effects, though it was still good to see old Ace Rimmer and Dwayne Dibley back in this episode.
Let's track it down before it harms Critus and Dave. I'm afraid this means death for both of us. That's a small price to pay to save our chummies, eh? What a guy.
They also brought back the Polymorph for the episode Can of Worms, but the original is still the best. If only for that great groinal attachment gag.
Help me, please! Please, I'm begging you!
And they said innuendo humour was dead.
No, it's alive and well. It's just not very funny.
My breakfast kept my body.
Number 2. Identity Within. Some of you may be wondering why I've put this episode on the list, and others of you are probably just wondering what this episode even is, but my reason for this is twofold. 1, for being one of the best scripted episodes in the series, and 2, Chris Barry's incredible recital of the script. There were many episodes of Red Dwarf that were written and conceptualised but never saw the light of day. But with the great cult following of this show, those missing episodes weren't lost to time. They were reborn with storyboards and the amazing impressionistic skill of Barry reading the scripts and voicing all of the characters in a way that is eerily similar to the genuine article.
Time for medicine.
What's that?
Double dose. Interactive stills of Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman 2.
What's the worst that can happen? We get something to dunk our toast in.
That's a sack of poison big enough to keep Lucretia Borgia busy for years. And it's primed to burst.
Hell, we should just have an episode where Chris Barry does play all of the characters. He kinda did that in Queeg, so let's just go whole hog with it. But the best of these lost episodes has to be Identity Within, an episode that was made for Series 7 which, before the episode Can of Worms, would have been the first episode to solely focus around my favourite character, the cat. Danny John-Jules is an incredibly talented guy, just watch this series of Strictly Come Dancing for proof of that, and while I was introduced to him through MI High, his performance of the cat is one of the greatest performances in a BBC comedy ever, since he transforms himself so thoroughly from his more down-to-earth real self into this loud, hyperactive, almost pimp-like cat man, but it's just a shame we never got to see him act out this episode himself. The episode itself revolves around how cat species must lose their virginity by a certain time, or else they die. Which thank God it doesn't work that way for humans, because I certainly would have been dead by now. Since most of his species are dead, they go around to various planets in search of a living female Phyllis Sapius, with tons of action, high tension and drama that is surprisingly more deep and emotional than Red Dwarf normally goes for, particularly in the series that this would have appeared in. I know that it's a bit odd to include an episode that never truly existed on the list, but I love it so much that I couldn't help myself. It's just a shame that this episode will probably never become a reality. But with Barry's stellar voice work, the closest we can get is still very acceptable. So, how long before we see Red Dwarf on Big Finish Productions, eh? Before we move on to number 1, here's a few honourable mentions. Future Echoes, an interesting episode with some good gags and foreshadowing for the following series. The Last Day, the first Crichton-themed episode after his casting change, it's a great heartfelt episode with some damn fine jokes and character moments. Meltdown, a brilliant setup for a sci-fi comedy episode with some great cameos and one of the funniest and darkest jokes in all of history.
They tying Winnie the Pooh to the stake?
That's something no one should ever have to see.
Which is ironic considering that the people that made that joke also wrote a song called I'd Never Met a Nice South African.
I've never met a nice South African, and it's not bloody surprising, man, 'cause we're a bunch of arrogant bastards who hate black people.
Hollow Ship, another great Rimmer episode that really makes you love and care for this Smeghead. Macrocracy, a great little political satire in the vein of the old Spitting Image episodes, with one of the best bits of fan service the series has ever given us.
I know the question. He knows the question. You know the question. We all know the question. Would you like some toast?
No, I'm fine, thank you. Why, would you like some toast?
Terraform, a brilliant psychosomatic episode that almost feels like an adult version of Inside Out. Queeg, one of only 2 Holly-based episodes, this one shows off how funny a talking floating head can be. And the number 1 Red Dwarf episode is... Marooned. This may seem like an even more odd choice than the last entry on the list, but I have a theory about television that if you can have an episode where the characters are doing virtually nothing at all, or a bottle episode as it's known, and it's still entertaining, then you know you've got a good show. And in Red Dwarf's case, not only have they helped prove that theory, but they've also got one of the best examples of it. Holly says she's... Oh shit, I forgot to mention about Holly's casting change in Series 3 to Hattie Hey Ridge. Nah, who cares, the writers certainly didn't. Anyway, she says that she's detected several black holes near Red Dwarf, and so the crew split up into Starbug and Blue Midget, the other shuttlecraft of Red Dwarf, to avoid them. Crichton and the cat go in Midget, Lister and Rimmer go into the Bug. Unfortunately, the bug gets hit by a meteor and crash lands on Hoth, or at least a planet that looks a lot like it, and even more unfortunately, there are no tauntauns to cut open for warmth, so Lister is forced to endure the cold and lack of food for weeks with only Rimmer's company. So, in other words, his perfect personal hell. However, while you'd think this episode would just be a bunch of sniping back and forth, it's surprisingly dramatic and solemn, with Lister and Rimmer discussing about what it means to be human, their childhoods, the ethical debate on whether or not to burn the last books in the universe to keep Lister alive, and it breaks down the barriers in the relationship in ways that we'd never seen between these two characters, and arguably never seen since. It's not only a testament to the pair's fantastic acting abilities, but also how good the writers are in taking such a simple scenario, and not only make it dramatic and deep, but it's still as entertaining and funny as any of the other episodes in the series. Plus, it's a landmark episode in the series in that it's the only episode in the whole franchise where Lister plays the guitar and it sounds good.
She's out of my life. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. I don't know whether to live or die. She's out of my life.
Just achieving that could rip a hole in the space-time continuum. Maybe that's why so much changed between Series 2 and 3. It is a shame to have the cat, Crichton and Holly excluded from so much of this great episode, but that's not what it was supposed to be about. It was meant to be about how these two men in the universe, who could not possibly be more unlike each other, finding out things about their opposite that made them bond with them more. Admittedly, the final gag of the episode does make all of this great development null and void in the end, but still, the rest of the episode, in my opinion, is the best Red Dwarf can possibly be, and strips away the layers of these two great characters and allow us to see them for who they really are. The man who lost his virginity on a golf course at 12, and the man who is a reincarnation of Alexander the Great's chief eunuch. But with a series as great as Red Dwarf, there were many episodes that I negated to mention, so if you had some episodes that you love but weren't on this list, mention them in the comments below. But until next month's episode, Stoke Mir Clipper, I'll be back for breakfast.